Hi, how you all doing? My name is Vincent Faney. I am the producer of the show Vinsanity Unplugged, in search of game changers. My passion, my job is to go out into the community and explore the various people in different aspects of life and careers, people who are changing the game in their own career. For instance, you got one person, Elon Musk. You know, he's a game changer. Steve Jobs. The list is too long, but today I'm interviewing a person who is thought to be one of the most promising game changers in politics to come, although he doesn't call himself a politician. His name is Mark Herbert. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, Mark, so give us a little background about you.
Okay. I grew up, had a kind of an interesting background. I grew up as a military brat, so I had the opportunity to live in a couple of different cultures before I was 12 years old.
Okay.
Started as a very young child in Portugal, and then came back to the Southwest, and then actually spent 3 years living in Japan, and then had an opportunity to live on the East Coast as a very, very young child, and then moved to Arizona when my dad retired from the military.
Okay.
I did my preliminary education at Arizona State University in Tempe. Went to work first for a copper mining company.
What did you do at the copper mining company?
I was actually in now what they call human resources, Vincent. Back then they called it personnel.
Okay.
So hiring, selection, working with it, working with all kinds of different people around that.
I just pictured you with the pitchfork for some reason. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
Or a pick.
Yeah, and then I went to work for Honeywell, and had the opportunity with Honeywell to work for them in 3 different locations, 3 different divisions, starting in Phoenix, Arizona, then moving to New Britain, Connecticut, which is kind of the industrial blue-collar suburb of Hartford, and then to right outside of Philadelphia. Then in 1988, I moved out here to Eugene to go to work for a high-technology company that's still here, and I've been in Oregon ever since.
Okay, what's the high-tech company that's still here?
The high-tech is now called Data Logic. Back when I went to work for them in 1988, they were called Spectrophysics Scanning Systems.
Right, okay.
And at that time, I'm dating myself, at that time barcode data capture and scanning in grocery stores and all that we all take for granted was a big deal. And we were one of the leading organizations in the world on that particular technology and its application in retail environments.
Okay, so back then it was just like punch cards? They had those cards? Or
you know, it was actually back when the days when checkers was a craft, and it was a union job, and it was a highly skilled job when you actually had to be able to work a cash register and make change in your head and everything like that.
Okay, yeah.
And inventory management, and they found that by using barcodes, the applying technology to that just made a lot of things faster, better, more simple.
Okay. So now what inspired you to go into politics?
Well, what inspired me, I guess, you know, and like you say, I hate to talk about its politics. What inspired me to run for office, okay, and that probably sounds like I'm hair splitting, is that for the last 30-some years, I have tried to be a change agent, and specifically where I've tried to be a change agent is bringing people together.
Okay.
Growing up as a military brat, working in organizations, what I found is there was always this idea that we have the employer and we have the employed.
Right.
And the interest of those 2 groups are fundamentally different. And I never really believed that. And probably one of the reasons that I was drawn to what we now call human resources was that whole idea that says, why do we deal with it like people, employees, and employers have fundamentally different interests?
Right.
I always believe there's a better way, is that let's find the points of commonality rather than the points of difference. And that has been how I've spent my career, first as a human resources manager and executive, and a C-level executive, and then as a management consultant for about on and off for the last 15 years.
Okay.
So when I take a look at where we're at today, and I'm going to be very frank that my primary focus politically is more on what I'll call local and state issues, less on national issues, is I see a lot of frozen infrastructure. I see a lot of partisan bickering. I see a lot of win-lose rather than win-win solutions. And I see issues, pretty significant issues, Vincent, that are facing our county, are facing our districts, are facing our state. And I feel like we need some new thinking and we need some breakthrough thinking to look at crafting solutions. And that's why I decided to enter the race, is to try to bring some of my professional skills as a manager, as a problem solver with a pretty strong track record to Salem to try to build solutions.
I would just real quick, just for my even though I'm unsophisticated in politics and so forth, I know that in the private sector, for you guys to do well, you have to sharpen your pencil and use all your wits to try to get everybody to be collaborative to work towards a goal.
Yes.
Waste as little money as possible, get as much done.
Yes.
In the government sector, which I worked in that sector, people still keep their paychecks in their job even if they're wasteful. Even if they're not collaborating. I'm not saying all government agencies do that, or all government people do that, but they still have a job.
I would agree. I would agree to an extent. I would agree to an extent, Vincent. And I think the issue is, in a lot of cases, government has some different mandates. When you are running a business of any kind, whether it's a for-profit or not for-profit, there's a ticking clock that looks at it, and there's an old expression in the not-for-profit world that says no margin, no mission. Okay, if my revenues and minus expenses don't cover those expenses, I'm not in business anymore, because as a business, you're not allowed to deficit spend.
Yes.
On the other hand, governments, we rarely see governments going out of business per se.
Yes.
However, what we have been seeing over the last 10, 12, 15 years that is getting concerning is we've seen municipalities and even states go bankrupt because of the burden of some of the costs that they've gotten themselves caught up in, where they're literally saying, we cannot afford to do this. We're declaring bankruptcy just like a business or an individual would.
Okay, so you know, my question is because there's probably so many reasons why this happens. I've been looking over the pamphlets the past every 4 years. Certain people who are been holding office for say 12 years. Now, I'm not just going to judge and say, well, I just think they're lying and they're just saying the right thing to stay elected. I don't know what's going on behind the scenes. They're saying, they say this list of things that all people like to say, healthcare, this, school's better, and every 4 years, and you're like, well, it's gotten worse. And I don't want to just automatically say it's always the politician's fault or the person who's in the office's fault. So there seems to be gridlock, and there seems to be things not getting done regardless of maybe the best efforts are not out there. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think that these issues are complicated, Vincent. I think a lot of cases people are looking for simple solutions to complex problems.
Okay.
And a lot of the things that we're facing, whether it's healthcare, whether it's education, whether it's economic development, whether it's the issues with the homeless, those issues are systemic. There is not one single solution or one single problem.
All interwoven?
Yes,
Okay.
and I see that a lot of times when I go in to work with organizations as a management consultant. They'll call me and say, well, we have a problem with X. And I go in and look at it and say, no, actually, you have a problem with X, Y, and Z. And if all as we do is try to address the problem with X, it's kind of like grabbing a balloon. Okay, all you do is you move the hot air around. You're not actually solving the problem. But saying to somebody, a lot of times as a consultant, I have to say to people, the issues that are facing your organization, I can't come in, I'm not a miracle worker. I can't come in over a long weekend or come in a couple of months and fix these. We have to go to root causes and identify what those root causes are and actually address them. In some cases, we have to ask people to give up some things, at least in the short term, in order to gain things in the long term. And people, as a rule, look at it, and they don't always trust their leadership. They look for those, again, those conflicting interests and say, okay, what's in it for me?
Right.
And I don't think that's unreasonable for people to say, you know, when you're asking me to give up something, whether it's wages, whether it's benefits or whatever, how is this going to benefit me in the long term? Right. And if I'm a regular working person, I look at it and say, okay, we're going to give this up and you're asking me to take this. And then I see the executives driving big cars, living in big houses, flying around on planes. What part of their sacrifice am I seeing?
Right.
And then in government, you know, you look at it, and the other thing that I hear a lot of people say is, I think that there are things we can learn from each other. I think there's a lot of things in business that make a lot of sense in government, but it is not exactly the same. You know, one of the things that you see is when you are an elected official, you are elected. And I think that's a very, very important differentiation, is you really are. There's a lot talked about these days in corporate America about servant leadership and everything like that. Well, the reality in politics, you really should be serving, okay, because you're being elected.
Right.
The typical CEO is not elected. They're hired by the board, or they're hired, you know, or in some cases they're an entrepreneur. So there really isn't a vote.
Right.
They don't get recalled
Right.
if they're not doing the right things. The other part about it, there's complexity. There are mandates that is government that are required and things to do that. There are also things I think that government is interjecting themselves into and said, you know, well, we're going to do these things, and I'm not sure they're the right player. We were talking about game changers, and one of the game changers that you know, I really admire and respect a great deal is a guy named Bill Gates.
Bill Gates, yes.
And Bill Gates has a great quote where he says, businesses cannot succeed in societies that fail. Okay?
Yeah.
The other thing that he says is the issues that are confronting us in terms of economic development, in terms of homelessness, in terms of a lot of issues, he said, if we really believe that the philanthropic community and government is going to be able to solve those issues by themselves, we are mistaken. I think that there are opportunities for collaboration between business and government. What I try to promote in every organization I worked with is, rather than talking about shareholders, I talk about stakeholders. and say every organization has multiple stakeholders. For example, when I work with a business, I tell them you have multiple stakeholders. Yes, you have your customers that buy your product or your service. You have your suppliers that provide you with the components to do that. You have your employees. You have the community that you serve. And the thing is, whenever we start to benefit one stakeholder of another, you're out of balance.
Okay.
But a lot of times that's what you hear is the shareholder demands this, the shareholder demands that. But if you're not stepping back and looking at it from a holistic perspective, then you're probably not going to have long-term solutions.
You think, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, the best businesses that I've seen recognize that. They recognize is that when we are a good community partner, when we're a good employer, we invest in the social infrastructure of the communities we're in, guess what? We attract good people, we keep good people, we have healthy communities because we recognize that we're not just there to harvest that community, we're part of that. That's where you see that kind of reciprocity, and those are the kind of relationships that I like to focus on and I like to build, Vincent.
That makes sense to me, and just asking when you're talking about the shareholders, the board members, putting pressure, do you think that's sometimes a legitimate fear, or maybe that is legitimate pressures that, you know, maybe the shareholders and board holders should change their perspective in the manner that you're talking, but in a lot of companies they're just, you know, show us the bottom line, show us the profit. Do you think that that is a pressure that should change?
Absolutely, and I think what a lot of organizations are learning is that short-term bottom line orientation is very short-sighted.
Yes.
That when you make decisions on the short term, in a lot of cases you punish yourself in the long term. A great example is if we look at the United States economy. One of the things that happened, and I'll try not to be too much of a wonk on this, okay, is one of the things that happened in World War II is a lot of the manufacturing capability in the world outside of the United States was devastated. Europe was devastated, Asia was devastated. We hear a lot about Japanese management. I know when I was a young student going to college, we heard all about Japanese management and total quality and all of these things that were brilliant that the Japanese were doing. Well, the funny part about that is there's nothing Japanese about it. That actually originated in Harvard in the 40s.
Oh, really?
With a guy named Edward Deming.
Okay.
What happened, however, is we were the strongest economy in the world because we were kind of the last economy standing. And one of the things that's really hard to do is to get somebody to fix something they don't perceive as broken. So here you are, you're American companies, you're making a lot of money, we don't have to rebuild our economies, we have a lot of products and all to sell because Europe and Japan didn't have the infrastructure to do that.
Right.
And then the Marshall Plan came into account where we went over there and said, okay, we need to rebuild these economies. But what happened there, Vincent, is they took these new ideas over with them. And Japan and Germany said, you know what, as long as we're rebuilding all of this industrial infrastructure, what if we bring those best practices to place? And that's what, in my field as a consultant, we call a green field, where you don't have to remove something. You're actually starting with a brand new piece of land. You don't have to, and so you can start over again. And so that's what happened. So it's just kind of me, ironically amusing. In a lot of cases, we talk about these Japanese management techniques. No, they're not Japanese at all.
Oh, okay.
The other thing that happens is one of the things that any good industrial engineer can tell you is a lot of improvements actually occur in the manufacturing process. They don't occur just with the design engineers. They occur when you're actually having to do it. Well, when you move your manufacturing offshore and all, a lot of that innovation, a lot of that energy, we lost that because we transferred it elsewhere. We also found it was cheaper in the short term. Rather than engaging with our employees and being better employers and doing things, it was cheaper to move things offshore and said, well, we can pay less wages and things like that, so that's a short-term solution. Now what's happening to us is we truly have become a world economy with the internet and everything like that. A lot of these smaller countries aren't interested in being harvested. What they're saying is, we want the benefit of that. Okay, if you're going to come into our country and do things, we want to build a robust economy for our people and our citizens. And so what we're doing is, in some cases, I think the positive part is we're bringing jobs back to America because we're realizing it's not as easy to go find some place where you can go find those people who will work for $1 a day and provide that quality, because they don't. It's unfortunate that it took that kind of a lesson for us to learn that, to say there's a better way. For me, I'm excited to see it because I've been telling people that for 15 years. One of the greatest learning experiences that we had, and a painful one, is 2008 when the economy just took a dump. And a lot of employers developed some pretty bad habits during those days, Vincent. They went back to not treating employees very well and saying you should be grateful to have a job. Well, now we're at a more robust economy. Unemployment is low. And what employers are saying is, wow, it's hard to get people. And if I don't do a good job being a good employer and I don't treat my employees well and I don't do things well, I can't find good employees. And so it's causing them, it's a catalyst for change that is saying, if I want to be competitive, I got to do things differently.
Wow. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I didn't know that I know that a lot of companies, from what I understand, is they move to offshores to get better rates. And some people say, well, you know, that just makes sense because over here they're not going to stay competitive on the world market. But it's kind of nice that everybody's evening out around, just saying, hey, we want a piece of the pie, and we're not going to be exploited, and so that's kind of better. Globally, I think, at every level.
It is much better, Vincent.
Okay.
And the thing about that says that, you know, when we go in there, and I'm not putting a negative spin on it. It's you know, I think capitalism is still a very viable system.
Sure.
But capitalism is what you say is a rising tide raises all boats, and let me explain that. Okay. Mm-hmm. If you have people and your economy is suffering and you have people that are not making family wages and things like that, they don't have the money to buy those products and services.
Right, right.
So it is actually in the best interest of the total society to say, as we raise the standard of living, it bounces through the entire economy. Years ago, I was on the board of Goodwill Industries of Lane County.
Okay.
And they had an expression that says, goodwill builds good lives. And one of the things we were able to demonstrate to people is when we're able to take somebody off of public assistance and put them back into the workplace and actually have them earning dollars rather than being in an entitlement program, that has an 8-to-1 ratio. So to put that in simple terms, what that means is that there's an 800% rate of return.
No, I'm not. I don't quite understand. So explain.
What that means is, let's say that, you know, for some reason you are economically impaired.
Okay.
You're homeless.
Sure.
Yeah, you don't have any money.
Okay.
When I get you back on the payroll, Vincent, when you're actually making a salary or you're making wages, now you have wages to spend. You're going to buy groceries. You're going to buy products and services. You're going to buy a home potentially.
Sure.
You're going to buy an automobile. Well, that reciprocates and it bounces through the economy. So the net effect of that is that money keeps being spent.
Oh.
It's 8-to-1.
Okay, that makes sense.
8-to-1.
So
800%.
So but the comparison of the being on an entitlement program is just simply where you're given money, though, right?
You are given money, but the other problem that I have with that is to me, when I just give you money, Vincent, I think that it's important to have a safety net. But I think when I just give you money, what I'm also saying to you is that's kind of an arrogant statement. It says, I've made a decision about you, Vincent, that you're not capable.
Right.
Okay, that you're not capable of making a living, that you're not capable of making good decisions for yourself, you're not capable of taking care of your family. And I think that if we do that long enough, we actually do create people who psychologically start to believe that.
Yeah, I've seen that in my own personal life where, you know, a lot of people want to give because of their heart.
Right.
And just like, hey, you know, I don't want to put too much on you. That just builds it up, you know, help you out. But if you do it too much, you don't put some stress on people. A little bit of stress, they tend to fall back on that and not really not build from that, not develop their character or their and so you end up going, geez, I spent years trying to help certain family members out, and they're no better for it. In some ways, it might even be worse.
Exactly. There's a great book out there that if you get a chance to read it, and I'd recommend to your viewers they read it as well. It's called Charity Detox.
Okay, I haven't heard of it, but yeah.
And what it says is charity feels really good to the giver.
Right.
But in a lot of cases, what we do is we create a codependent relationship.
Right.
And in fact, what we need to do is we need to build people's capacity and people's skills.
Right.
You know, one of the things you and I were chatting about before we went on air is the whole idea of the homelessness.
Right.
And how do we address that? And first of all, what I would say is we should not make an assumption when we're talking about the homeless that we're talking about one population.
Right.
I think there are multiple populations of homeless. I think that there are people who are homeless because they are actually suffering from psychological or medical conditions and things like that. And so the first thing we need to do with those people is get them stabilized.
Right.
Because until they're stabilized, until they're in shelter, until we address those root causes, those folks aren't going to be able to fully participate in our economy.
Right.
I think there are other people that are temporarily homeless, that it's not a case of where this is a place they wanted to be, something happened to them, an event happened in their lives or something like that. And then I know that nobody wants to hear this, but I think that there are other folks who just basically have learned to work the entitlement system.
Right.
It's that if I can create this thing where it may not be the lifestyle that you're enjoying in middle class America, but if I can move from program to program, I can enjoy a certain lifestyle and a certain degree of security, and I don't have to work very hard for it. And so I think that when we look at solutions, I think the first thing we need to look at is how do we create an environment for people to actually be part of society.
Right.
I work right now, one of the things that I'm doing is I'm working right now with an organization that works with the developmentally disabled, intellectually and physically disabled people. One of the most important things that we try to do is provide opportunities for those people to be included in the community. For years, what we did with those folks is we warehoused them, Vincent. We put them away because it made people who were able-bodied or intellectually, it made us uncomfortable to deal with those folks. So we tucked those people away and said, we're going to take care of you in a way, but what we're going to do is we're going to put you in a warehouse and give you 3 squares a day and lock you down. And that's psychologically really hard on those folks. The agency I work for says, no, let's get folks out in the community, and they may never be able to fully participate, but they can participate at differing levels. And in doing that, they take a tremendous amount of pride in that, in the fact that they're holding down a job, at the fact that they're contributing to society, at the fact that they're able to, to actually participate in society. And I think that same thing is there is when we look at the homeless, let's look for opportunities to say, how do we stabilize them, and then how do we get them back on track to where they're contributing and break through those psychological barriers of feeling like a victim.
Yeah, I've seen that at Lane Community College when I was out of work for a while. I got retrained at the community college, and they have a program where they have people that they call developmentally disabled.
Yes.
And quite frankly, half the time, when you're talking to them, you wouldn't know it because they speak with no greater. They sounded like a lot of my friends with high IQs.
Right.
Just talking about, oh, the weather's nice.
Right.
This is nice. That's nice.
Right.
So on a certain level, we all operate in a specific way unless we're called upon to show our math skills or this or that. And these people that are at Lane, they just very sweet, genuine.
Yes.
Just like you and me.
Yes,
and proud to work,
yes,
hard workers,
yes,
and now they have an apartment where they could pay their rent and so forth.
And those are exactly some of the people that we're working with. And it's a case of they're developmentally disabled. It doesn't mean they need to be warehoused.
Right.
It doesn't mean they're incapable of anything.
Right.
And I think that's the thing, looking at root causes and everything rather than just putting a solution on there. The funny thing about when we do something charitable, if we really look ourselves in the mirror, I think in many cases, unless we really are at that higher plane, Stephen Covey's level of self-actualization,
right,
we're doing it for ourselves as well, because writing that check feels good to us.
Sure, sure.
Look what I did.
All the unselfish things we do are for selfish reasons.
I'm a benefactor. I did this. And so we need to look at that and say, I think the other thing that happens is we can get wrapped up in taking care of kind of the little people. And I think that that's one of the things that is again, a reason that I'm running is, back in the days of the 1850s and 1860s and 1870s, the Oregon Trail was a big deal because the East Coast and even some of the Midwest had started to become more commercialized. And the Oregon Trail was still that frontier where you could come out there and you could reinvent yourself. That even if you were a poor kid from the slums of Philadelphia, you could come out the Oregon Trail and you could get a piece of land, you could have a craft, you could get a small business, and you could reinvent yourselves. And I think that was a very, very important part of our culture and the human spirit. And so one of the reasons I'm running is because if I take a look at the legislature right now, the legislature in Salem right now tends to have, number one, a very progressive bias. And progressive means. And progressive is in a lot of cases it's a code word for people that are more liberal. People that are more about entitlements and more government intervention.
Okay.
And the other thing is it's very urban. We take a look at it, and Oregon's kind of an interesting anomaly. About 2/3 of the population of Oregon lives down the I-5 corridor. Between Portland, Salem, and Eugene. But there's a lot of Oregonians that don't live in Portland, Salem, or Eugene. And so a lot of the policy that we see coming out of there, a lot of the programs we see coming out of there are very much based on that kind of urban orientation. In my district, Vincent, half of my constituents do not live in urban Lane County or urban Lynn County. They live in rural areas, and one of the reasons that I'm running is what they have said to me is the individual who has been in the seat for the last few terms has a very urban orientation. He doesn't really understand the issues of rural folks. And that really has not been a hallmark of his campaign.
And the urban areas depend on the rural areas, whether they want to believe that or not.
Exactly. And you look at things and say, okay, there's a lot of my constituents that are second, third, fourth generation farmers. or people that drive in that still enjoy that rural lifestyle or live in small communities and things like that. And their issues and needs and concerns are different than people who live in Eugene. You know, we were talking about, again, before we were on air, you're originally from Philadelphia, okay?
Right.
And I've spent some time in big cities. Sometimes I annoy people because I still refer to Eugene as a relatively small city with 250,000 people. But it's that urban thing that says there's infrastructure here and all that we take for granted. One of the concerns that I have about urban Lane County specifically is a lot of the infrastructure that we have in urban Lane County came from the fact that back 20, 30, 40 years ago, the primary industries in Lane County were farming, aggregates extraction, so I'm talking about things like sand and gravel and timber. They built a lot of this infrastructure. When the environmental laws and other things changed, those businesses went away. At this stage of the game, close to between 5 and 6 out of 10 jobs in Lane County are either with government agencies or not-for-profit agencies. I would tell you, Vincent, that's not a very robust infrastructure to build your economy on.
No, I would agree. It's kind of a Ponzi scheme or inverse. I mean, it's like an upside-down mortgage or something.
It kind of is. We're just moving the money around from one agency to another. And that's concerning to me. I'm a very, very big believer that you need to have a balanced economy that has representation from multiple sectors. And I think that, you know, I don't think you ever want to put all of your eggs in one basket.
Do you believe in a mixed economy? You hear some people say if we're going to have an economy, it should be purely this or purely that. And other people say, no, we need a mix, and you know, it's confusing to me. I'm just trying to make it.
I absolutely believe in a mixed economy.
Okay.
Statistics would tell you that most of business in America is not huge conglomerates. It's actually small businesses.
Right.
What they don't tell you is, for example, my own situation. Okay, I opened my small business in 1993.
Okay.
Some of my clients are small businesses like myself. They have under 10 or under 25 employees. Some of my clients are also very, very large businesses. And most of us in small businesses sell our services to organizations with large businesses. That's the nature of how things work. We supply those organizations. A great example is a few years ago, we had what I thought was a very good thing for Lane County. Because our economy had been bruised by the cutbacks in the timber industry and the aggregates, we had high unemployment. We had Sony come to town. Just manufacturing. We had, at that time, it was Hyundai Semiconductor. And we had Symantec. They brought new, different jobs to town, and they employed people. And I know that there's people who feel like that was a bait and switch because each of those organizations received property tax abatements for coming here. Now, what they don't look at is saying they receive property tax abatements, in the most case, somewhere around $10 or $15 million over 5 to 7 years. I can tell you for a fact, because a couple of them were clients of mine, that Sony Disc Manufacturing and Hynix were putting payrolls into the Lane County economy every year of around $600–700 million a year. Per year. So if you do the math on that, I think we got the better end of the deal. Because those were people that were going out buying homes, buying groceries, buying goods and services. There's also the physical infrastructure that those companies built here. In both cases, I know that both of those organizations spent in excess of $1 billion in hard money. So that was construction work that was done here.
Those are the buildings and things that are still here.
Exactly. It's a trickle down.
So somebody else could rent that building. There's something there for them to move right into and rent.
Well, and not only that, when the construction guys show up, that means they got to live somewhere, Vincent. Okay, they got to eat. Okay, they got to buy gas. You know, they have to do all those things. So that's money being spent in our economy. So when you have that kind of balanced economy, I grew up, I went to high school in a small agricultural community in southern Arizona, Chandler, Arizona. 25,000 people.
Chandler,
yeah. Very agricultural, that was the business. And then about 35 years ago, Intel came to town and said, you know, we look at this as being a great place. We have access to a world-class university. Sounds familiar. We have access to transportation. Sounds familiar. And a bunch of other things. Okay, we would like to talk to you, community leaders, about building a plant here. And what we're going to do is we're going to invest $1 billion in infrastructure, and we're probably going to employ somewhere around 500 or 600 people. And these are the things we need. We need good education. We need good healthcare infrastructure. We need these things. In return, we're going to be a good employer. We look at ourselves as a stakeholder in this community. Now there's more. Now there are 3 fabs in Chandler. And that little town of 25,000 people is now about 300,000 people. And it has one of the best educational systems in the state of Arizona, and in fact in the country. and it has very, very high quality of living. Because what you saw is a partnership between industry and the community that said, this isn't a win-loss, this is a win-win solution.
Right.
That's more the model that I would like to see us be using. And it's one of those ones that requires a partnership, that it is, you know, again with Bill Gates, societies cannot win.
Right.
And businesses can't win, and societies are failing.
Well, you know, I noticed that for some reason, nothing stays the same. There's always change, no matter the best intentions of technology. I mean, technology doesn't change. So you got a place that's in business for 10, 15 years, and then it's not, or it has to change or something. Yes. So that company has to move elsewhere.
Yes.
You know, so all of a sudden there's a downturn in the economy, and people are saying, well, the government should have done something. They should have made these jobs stay here, and that's just that's just not the way things work.
That's a zero-sum game, Vincent.
Yeah.
And let's talk about a couple of our issues that are concerning me about why we haven't had more businesses come to Lane County, more businesses come to Oregon.
Oh, good.
We have 150,000 jobs in Oregon as of right now, unfilled jobs, Vincent. Okay, these are family wage jobs that employers will tell you, I would desperately like to hire that 150,000 people, but I cannot find trained people who have the basic skills to do these jobs. And like I said, these are family wage jobs. Okay, so we're not talking $12, $13, $14, $15 an hour. We're talking upwards of that. We have a high school graduation rate in Oregon that is number 48 out of 50.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And more than crazy, it's unacceptable.
Yeah.
So there that is. Now, one of these solutions that you hear a lot from, again, and I don't mean to use this pejoratively, the progressive element is the problem is school funding. I think that funding may be part of the issue, but I think that's a simple solution. I think that when 1 in 4 children is not graduating from high school, I think we also have an engagement issue. We're not providing the right curriculum.
Okay.
So if I look at it and say that we have 1 in 4 students that isn't graduating, we had 150,000 jobs that we're not filling, I'm willing to bet you that if we put our minds to it, there's a solution in there that is a win-win. One of my pet projects is this whole thing that back when I was a kid, we used to call it vocational education, shop and wood shop and drafting and all of that. Now we call it CTE, or career and technical education. And a lot of our high schools here locally, we're not offering very much of that, Vincent.
Right.
And so I'm a believer that some of those kids are not engaged, that every student that is in our high schools in Lane County does not desire, nor are they oriented towards getting a 4-year degree from a 4-year college.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong, there's nothing to look down on them saying, I want to work with my hands.
Yeah.
I want to be a plumber. I want to be an electrician. I want to be a mechanic.
Yeah.
You know, that's where I want to go. And there's a need for those people, and those are good paying jobs.
Yeah.
And so here we are. And so I was a little disturbed when kind of our answer is to say is, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to raise the minimum wage. How about instead we put that 150,000 people back to work, Vincent? I think that's a better solution.
Well, you know, it's the thing about the school is, you know, I have a lot of friends who live in Eugene, and they've been college educated, and they like to put their nose down at one of the boroughs across the bridge from them, thinking, oh, they're blue collar. And for some reason, some people think that blue collar workers are less intelligent, and some of the brightest people I know, plumbers and carpenters, you know, it's like, you know, if you can't fix your own toilet, you know, then, you know, you got to wonder who's smart and who's not, you know. And
well, there's a great old joke that they say is, you know, where the plumber shows up at the doctor's house and everything and does the work. Okay?
Yeah.
And then, you know, and he presents the doctor with the bill, and the doctor says, my God, that's $150 an hour, you know. I don't make $150 an hour. And the plumber smiles at him and says, yeah, I didn't make $150 an hour when I was a doctor either.
That's good.
And now I'm a plumber.
That's it. So no, there's, you know, there's something. Yeah, that's good. There should be. I mean, we should have more blue collar jobs in vocational schools.
Well, and I'd actually like to see us lose that whole stigma of blue collar. And you know, one of the things is, again, I'm going to be a little bit of a wonk on you. Okay,
sure.
Is the guy that I write about in a lot of my books. I've written a couple of books about the employer-employee relationship.
Okay.
And a gentleman, an industrial engineer from England. His name was Frederick W. Taylor. Okay. And Frederick W. Taylor created a model he called scientific management.
Okay.
And it was almost religiously Calvinistic. And what Frederick W. Taylor said is there's 2 kinds of people in the world. There are people that are born to be managers and leaders and are smart, and the rest of the people are dumb. and they're lazy and they're dumb and they have to be micromanaged. And so the job of managers is to follow them around and make sure they do their work. And that was actually where the idea of white collar versus blue collar management originated.
Oh, okay.
And it just said, so they're the people who do, and then the rest of us. And I was educated, Vincent, as one of those white collar guys.
Right.
Okay, when I was going to college and getting my degree in business back in the 70s, I was told to direct and control and budget things you do to people rather than things you do with people. And that's been the prevailing model that is being taught in business schools, not just in the United States, but in Europe as well, for the last 150 years.
Okay.
And the problem is, it doesn't work anymore, Vincent.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the whole stigma of blue collar versus white collar, to me, what we need to look at is everybody makes a contribution. And to make an assessment that says, you know, how much you get paid or how much education you have is a reflection of your value as a human being. When I'm talking to employees about compensation, what I tell them is, this may sound like a consultant's answer, but how much I pay you is a reflection of the market value for your skills and services. It has nothing to do with your worth as a person.
That's right.
Because if we follow that to its logical conclusion, that would say that guys that run drugs, okay, and make billions of dollars a year, are more valuable to our society than Mother Teresa was. I'm not sure I buy that.
No, that's pretty funny. You're right. That's a good example.
But it does say, okay, that skills ebb and flow. And so what we should look at is saying to people is, it should be about contribution.
Right.
It should be about equity. And that's another term that I use, is when I say equity, equity is not means that we don't just embrace a socialistic model that says we give everything to everybody.
Right.
Equity says to me, what it means is an old-fashioned word you don't hear very often. That word, Vincent, is fair.
Right.
Is it fair? Okay, can I look somebody in the eye and say, what I'm compensating you for your contribution is fair and equitable and reasonable?
Right.
And if I have a man and a woman working next to each other, is it fair and equitable to them? Am I looking past their gender and looking at the skills?
Right.
Am I looking at it and says that your value as a person has nothing to do with your national origin, your race, your color, your religious, your gender, any of those things? It says, what is the contribution that you are bringing to my organization? That's the model we should be using.
That's the bottom line.
Yes.
That's the great equalizer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, yeah, I get some friends who are diehard, laissez-faire, almost extreme Milton Friedman, Ayn Rand. I think they would make Ayn Rand and Milton Friedman cringe at how hard they are, you know, because a little extreme. You know, I sort of, you know, I see where you're coming from. I believe is that, you know, we got to look out for each other. There shouldn't be just like some sort of factory. We just churn people out just to perform and to be harvested and tossed aside. So you're looking at the other extreme?
Absolutely. When I used to hear people say is, well, my employees should be grateful, you know, to have a job, okay, during the economy. They shouldn't be in here talking to me about a raise or other benefits. They should be grateful to have a job. And I said, you know, that's crap. Okay, because the reality, let's be honest with each other. The reason that you're paying them to do that work is not because you're benevolent.
Right.
The reason you're paying them to do that work is because either A, you can't, or B, you don't want to do that work yourself.
Right.
So let's not shine people on and say you're doing them a favor by paying them wages to perform that work. It actually is a relationship between equals.
Yeah.
You are, you know, what I say to people a lot, and, you know, people have accused me for being a little bit of a smartass in saying this, is saying, Mr. Lincoln freed the slaves. Okay, your employees are independent agents, and what you do is you don't own them, you rent their skills and abilities.
Yeah.
And remember that, okay? They are loaning you their intellectual capacity and the fruits of their labor for a fair return on what you pay them. And never forget that, okay, that you are not in a superior position because of the fact you're an owner.
Right.
We all need each other.
Yeah, certainly. You know, the issue about what's a living wage, should we have minimum wage? You know, and you know, the question, what is a living wage? Because a living wage for me might be more than what some people need and not near enough what other people think they need, you know. And I know that when I was forced out of work for a while, going around looking for, can I mow your lawn? You know, can I do this? Well, you know, a big corporate landscaping business you know, pays their people minimum wage.
Right.
And that's appropriate, okay, I guess.
Right.
I'm competing with them, so I can't charge myself minimum wage. I have to be willing to work for less.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, I'm happy to do it. I'll work for less. I have to do it.
Right.
You know. So then you say, okay, well, I only have X amount of time that I could work, and X amount of resources. Maybe I get some other people and link them up. We'll network, and I'll just take a small portion of them. But I'm not getting minimum wage. They're certainly not going to get minimum wage, and you get a lot of people complaining about it. I go, you know, these 97-year-old people who don't have hardly any money, they can't afford that landscaper.
Exactly.
And, you know, we got to find some way of making it without just, you know, some win-win situation where, okay, I'm satisfied enough. I prefer to make this, but I'm content with this for now. They're happy with this, and this is just a transitory state until things change.
Well, exactly, Vince. And when I work with employers, what I tell them is you've got to stop looking at your payroll as an expense. You need to look at it as an investment, because I can show you definitively, scientifically proven data that says if your employees are engaged, if they believe in what you're doing, if they believe that they are valued, if they are given an opportunity to contribute, they are going to grow your business. You're going to be more stable, more profitable. You're going to have a better business than your competitors. And breaking through that thinking that's saying, okay, that by being more fair, by being more reasonable, in fact, it doesn't cost you more, it improves your business.
Yes.
If we look at businesses like Microsoft and Apple and some of these other businesses that we've talked about as kind of game changers, look at how they deal with their employees, Vincent. They're all very desirable places to work because they recognize that the intellectual capital, the capability of their people is what really differentiates themselves, and they recognize that and they invest in it.
Right, right.
And when people get that and realize that, again, that rising tide raises all boats. The other problem, what happens is when I artificially inflate a market and say, okay, what we're going to do here is we're going to pay this, is what happens is the employer just turns around and passes that along.
Right.
And so it becomes a never-ending cycle.
Right.
It says, okay, I'm now paying $11 for a job that used to pay $7 an hour. So what that says, you just added $4 an hour to my cost. Most small businesses can't eat that, Vincent.
No, yeah.
So what they're going to do is that's going to show up somewhere else.
Yeah, I've seen that where businesses were forced to take on costs they couldn't afford. They went out of business just because some new mandate came down.
Or they reduce the number of employees because they say that the choice you're giving me is I used to employ 5 people.
So that's
now
more people,
5 or 3.
More people, less money in the economy.
Exactly.
More people actually needing to take money from the government.
Exactly.
And so forth. So yeah, it gets to be pretty tough.
You know, and when you look at it systemically. You know, I remember years ago when I would have employers come to me and saying, Mark, I want to pay people a fair living wage, but I'm a small company. And what I'd say, well, how about we do this? What we do is we start people at minimum wage, but then we say to them, over the next 12 to 18 months, we're going to give you an opportunity to learn skills and to perform better. We're going to invest in you. And by doing that, we're going to be able to afford to pay you more money because your productivity is going to go up. And so it was a win-win situation.
Yeah, it's pretty
awesome.
awesome.
And in doing that, it was a win-win, and I'm very, very pleased. In a lot of cases, those were people I worked with 25 years ago that are still using those models, saying it's still working, where I say to people, you know, I'm going to give you that opportunity to make that additional wage because I want you to feel secure.
Right.
I want to be able to pay you good benefits. I want you to be able to provide for your family, because in doing that, you're going to come in and you're going to contribute to my organization. It's going to be a win-win situation.
Right. Wow.
It just takes some thinking.
Yeah.
And a little bit of time.
You know, I worked for the post office for quite a few years, and different post offices have different cultures.
Yes.
And some of the cultures are more confrontational, some of them are more great places to work, you know, positive. And but regardless, the pay is equal throughout.
Yes.
And it's good pay for that kind of blue collar. It's a gravy job for somebody who's done some.
It's well compensated.
It's nice, you know. And yet, you know, to hear some people talk, it's a salt mine, and you're like, well. Bottom line. A lot of these people, when the union when there was a questionnaire, do you think you need more money? Would you like this? There's the people in the positive branches. No, I'm getting paid enough. I'm fine, you know. And even in the bad branches where they weren't getting paid, where they were getting paid the same, they just said, no, we're well compensated. We would just like somehow for the union to make this place a lot nicer to work, you know. And so the union, for whatever reason, didn't do that. They just said, well, we're gonna basically bargain for greater wages.
Yes.
And so I think these people would have been happy if they were looked at as a nice, important value.
Well, let me give you a great story, okay? Sure. I think it's a great story anyway, Vincent, is this agency that I'm working with, okay? We had a situation where the folks bargained with the union to pay a 5% pay increase. Unfortunately, when I came into work in the organization, I recognized that we were actually losing money. And so I had to sit down with the union and saying, this is not where I would not like to pay you that salary increase. I just need you to understand that right now as we sit today, the only way I can pay you that increase is to reduce the number of people I have on the payroll.
Right.
So what I said to them, what I'd offer you instead is a compromise. How about if we agree to work together for the next 5 months to reduce expenses, to increase revenues, so that I can pay you that increase that you negotiated and be able to do that without reducing employees and without reducing programs. And people told me, oh, that's crazy, you'll never get them to do that. Well, you know what? I did get them to do that, Vincent. And we're working together, and we have made enormous progress. But it goes down to that example of talking to people, not at people, is I didn't say to them, you guys are greedy and you're wrong. What I said to them is, here are the facts.
Here are the facts.
I'm going to show you my books.
Yeah.
I'm going to open the kimono to you and show you my books and let you know exactly where every dollar is being spent. And then what I'm going to ask you to do is work shoulder to shoulder with me to say, our most important goal is to serve the people we serve, is to provide a safe, secure environment for them. Our second most important goal is to provide a safe, secure environment for the people who work here. And a third goal is, in order to do that, we have to be economically secure. So I reached out my hand to them and said, will you work with me to accomplish that goal? And they did, and we are.
So you're going to be using that approach and that philosophy to every issue that's facing us now as you go into office with and working with other people?
I'm not the smartest guy in the room, Vincent, okay? That's a model I've been using for the last 30 years, is saying, what can we agree on? What is it we both need from this relationship? What is it we both need to make this better? And let's start with that idea of saying, okay, how do we do this together? I never go into a situation saying, this is what I have to have. In order for me to have that, I need to take that away from you. I always look at it from saying, how do we walk together to achieve the goal that we both want?
Right. Well, you know, it's not always being the smartest guy in the room. We both know legions of people who are very bright, very educated, who have trouble just doing their day-to-day task or having relationships with people and getting things done. And yet, and I've seen people who just, for all respects, being average, they get things done because they had that kind of philosophy. So, so in what way do you think would set you ahead of the pack of people who are offered just as much intelligence and background? What edge do you think you have?
I think the edge that I have, Vincent, is I can actually show people over the last 30 years where I've done it. So for me, this isn't a book I've written or a concept that I have. This is actually something where in financial services, in manufacturing, in high technology, and other places, I've actually gone in, and in not-for-profits, I've actually gone and used this model, and I can point people to those outcomes and saying, this isn't a theory of mine. Okay, this is something I've done. And what I would say is, okay, let's look at the other people in the race, and I would ask them, okay, let's put our cards on the table. Show me your track record.
Okay. Well, it sounds like you're really big on transparency as you're showing the books to the people you're working with, who are working for you. I think a lot of people would like to see more of that in government. Like, you know, you always hear these rumors about backdoor deals and all that stuff. You know, I think, you know, I was talking to a couple of people running for office, and we're talking about how it would be great if people in the community got more engaged and kind of like just started interacting and kind of like have some conversation with you all and say, well, what's going on? And, you know, are you all you guys talking? We believe in you, Mark, but, you know, how do we help the other guys to work with you?
Playing well with others.
Yeah. So how would you recommend?
You know, I think that, exactly. I think that there are people that do. I think as an elected representative, you need to be out there talking to people, and you need to talk to them if it's about issues that are important to them. The other thing that you need to remember is a lot of folks are tired. You know, they go to work, they do their work, they come home, they want to spend a little bit of time with their family, you know. And so for those people who are not in the political game, they're looking at it saying, boy, you know, yeah, I'd love to engage, but where do I put that on my priority list between feeding my family, trying to find some time to recreate and have a quality of life and everything? That's kind of why we send you guys to go represent us and do that. I think that the other thing that's happened is anybody that aspires to elected office needs to look themselves in the mirror and realize that elected officials at every level of government have done a very, very, very poor job the last few years of earning and keeping people's trust. Okay, we've given them a black eye. They've looked at things that we've done, and so we need to own that, and we need to recognize that. We need to look people in the eye and say, you're absolutely right. As your elected leaders, we have not always served you well. And I'm going to own that. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do everything that I can possibly do to restore your trust in me and then your trust in the system. And I'm going to recognize that it's up to me to earn that trust. Okay, that, you know, if I look at it, you know, the reason that you've lost trust in me is because we can point We can point to the decisions that have been made, where people look at it and say, okay, you did not act in my interest. You acted in the interest of what looks like to be your own interest. And when I teach leadership, I tell people that, okay, just because you have the title of boss, just because you have degrees, just because you have a big office, does not mean that people need to trust you. It also doesn't mean that people need to respect you. I always tell people you should respect the office, but to be respected as an individual is a relationship. And you need to understand, as their leader, leadership is a gift, okay? You can be appointed boss, you can't be appointed leader. And the way that you become a leader is sweat and blood and tears, is actually going out there demonstrating to people, I have your back.
Yeah.
I've earned your trust, I've earned your confidence, and if I make a mistake, I'm going to own that mistake. And not only is it okay for you to confront me, I want you to confront me and let you know that you don't feel like my actions were consistent with my words, and hold me accountable to it.
Well, you know, I just, for some reason, it popped to mind just hearing you speak, is that makes me think of certain historic people who have been like beloved by their country, by their soldiers or men, and you could agree with their politics, and they may have been, oh, I don't know, a lot of bad qualities, but you know, Alexander the Great, Attila the Hun, some of these others who say what you will about their character, they put themselves on the front line, sacrifice with their men, and often put their people before them. And that's pretty powerful.
It is. One of my favorite books these days, and I promote it to almost everybody, is a book called The Speed of Trust.
Speed of Trust.
By Stephen M.R. Covey. Everybody's heard of Stephen Covey and his 7 Habits of Almost Everything.
Right.
Okay, this is his son.
Okay.
And his son says that there are 3 levels of trust fundamentally in our intellect. The first one is what he would call statutory trust. Statutory trust is a trust that comes with your position or your office. We put statutory trust in the hands of our military or our police officers or our judges and say, okay, you've been appointed. Politicians, to an extent, are statutory trust.
Okay.
The second level of trust, Vincent, is what he calls knowledge-based trust or competency-based trust. That's a lot of what we do in doctors. We say, okay, we look at all those diplomas and all that education, everything you've had, and say, you must be really smart. Okay, so we're going to trust you to make decisions in areas where we don't have the expertise or the knowledge to make decisions for us. But he said, but the really most important level of trust is what he calls identity-based trust. Identity-based trust says that you and I have spent time with each other. It says we've shared a foxhole, we've shared experiences, and says you trust me because I have said what I'm going to do and then done what I've said. He said if you truly aspire to leadership, you need to understand that identity-based trust is where real leadership lives. And there's only way you can gain that, and that is by building it and earning it. It does not come with an office. It does not come with education. And that's what I teach leaders is you need to understand that in order to get the trust of your people, you need to earn it. It is not incumbent upon them to give it to you. It's incumbent upon you to earn it.
Right. That really resonates with me as a person who believes that if you want to get something done and inspire other people, I mean, it may be originally your idea, but it's basically not just about you, it's about everybody.
Exactly.
And you got to be willing to get your own skin in the game, get your knuckles a little bruised maybe, and sacrifice and take a few hits.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if you're not willing to do that, you know, one of the things I do as part of my consulting practice is I have the privilege of working with a group called the Honor Foundation.
Honor Foundation. I heard of them. I don't know.
Yeah, the Honor Foundation works exclusively with people transitioning out of the military, and a very specific group of people transitioning out of the military. It works only with people from the Special Operations Forces.
Oh, Navy SEALs and such.
Yes.
Okay.
The elite of the elite.
Very respect.
And saying that these are people now that are leaving the military and going out in the world. And one of the interesting conversations I have with my fellows, as we call them, is another great author is a guy named Simon Sinek that wrote a book, Start With Why. Start With Why says every company should ask themselves that. What is my why? Why does my company exist? What is the purpose that I'm trying to fix? Well, when you're a special operations soldier, sailor, Marine, your why is very, very clear, Vincent.
Right.
And I've said to them, when you go out into the world, you're going to find that question is not as transparent.
Yeah.
You're also going to find when you're a special operator, everybody that's standing to the right of you or the left of you shares that why and shares that vision. Identity-based trust is fundamental to who they are.
Oh, yeah.
When you go out in the civilian world, you're not always going to find that to be the case.
Not even your own friends and family.
And they've said that. They're like, oh my goodness, Mark, you are so right. When I look at these guys and I'm like, you want me to just trust you? It's like, that isn't the way I roll, okay? You know, you want my trust, you're going to have to earn it. And the idea to them is that they are very passionately committed to that idea, And you know, I know it's a trite thing to say, but it's kind of like these guys, you know, like people have said. Every soldier, sailor, Marine that we have that is served or is currently serving wrote a check to the United States up to the value of their life.
Yeah. Yeah.
And says, you may cash this.
Yeah. Yeah.
You may cash this check. That's identity-based trust
Yeah.
at its most fundamental. And so, you know, understanding that and working with that and explaining that to others in companies that's saying is, can you look yourself in the mirror and look your employees in the eye and say, I have earned that level of trust from you as my employee, as my stakeholder.
Right.
That's what they should aspire to. That's what I think, and this probably sounds really silly, as somebody that aspires to elective office, that's what you should aspire to, is to say is one of the things that's going to happen if I prevail in the election, there are going to be people who voted for me, Vincent, and probably at least one or two in my district that didn't. But what I need to remember is if I'm elected, I have a responsibility to every voter in my district, the people who voted for me, the people who didn't vote for me, and the people who didn't vote at all.
Right.
I don't just get to pick and choose and say, well, you didn't vote for me, well, you're a D and I'm an R or whatever, then that's not my issue.
Right.
It is it's kind of, it'll sound silly, but it's kind of a sacred duty that says that when we take that oath of office,
Sure.
you have a sacred duty to those that you serve.
Yeah, I'm pretty big on that. If you have a stated mission, you know, you state a mission, you have a code you live by, you don't just say it to impress other people around you. If it means anything, only because it really means something to you.
Exactly.
And if it really means something to you, then you're going to do everything on heaven and earth to make that happen.
Exactly.
That's just the way it, you know.
Exactly.
So that's why I have a deep respect. I've met a few people who I consider friends at various levels who have been in special forces, and I'm just like, wow, it's, you know, I mean, I was in the Marines, but you know, these guys took things to a whole new level, and it's like, wow, you know.
Their why was very, very clear to them, and the whole, you know, old-fashioned words like honor and integrity and commitment.
Yeah.
Well, those aren't just words for those guys.
No, that's their whole life.
And women.
That's their whole life. They'll give their life up for it. They'll give everything up for it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Even they'll lose their wealth over it. Even a marriage. And yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, and it's not, and in most cases, it's not because they couldn't find anything else they did. It was a calling for them. They chose to serve.
Yeah. I think some people have you determine, you know, when you said reinvent yourself, and I think we're always faced with doing that. And of course, there's the why reinvent myself? Okay, you figure out the why, then it's like, okay, well, I got to reinvent myself. That means I got to basically construct myself, and that means it has to be working, everything working. Sure. So when you're running for office, you're saying why, and then you're going to do it, and you're like, it just makes sense to you at a very fundamental level.
I've had the challenge and opportunity, Vincent, of reinventing myself multiple times. It's like when I talk to groups of young college students, I say, if you look at my career, a lot of people tell you it's a train wreck. I mean, here's a guy, he was a corporate HR guy, and then he's a consultant, and then here he is as an operational executive with a bank. It's like, wow. And I said, yeah, in some ways you could look at it and say, as I've had 4 or 5 separate careers, now I'm running for office. Yeah. But what I say is, not really. Okay, if you peel the layers apart and look what I've really done, is what you see is a guy that for 35 years has built solutions.
Okay. Well, I got to say,
that's the common thread.
We have like 36 seconds to go. What would you like to? What's your website, and what are the books you read? I want to read your books.
Okay. My first book is a book called Managing Whole People. The idea that we manage individuals and one at a time. My second book is a book that I published in 2011 about healthcare. It's called Plan B, an alternative to Obamacare.
Okay.
My website for my election is www.markherbert.org, and I also have a Facebook page, Mark Herbert for State Representative.
Okay. Well, sir, it's been a pleasure. I could talk to you for hours, quite frankly.
Thank you, Vincent.
Yeah,
Thanks for your
time. It's been a pleasure. So check them out. Thanks so much. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much. I could talk to you for hours, sir.
Thank you.